station today when I was waiting for the train. I saw all the Amish, and everybody was on their phones, and they were all just talking to each other.
Were they?
Yeah, I know,
You know, I can give you one reason why I guarantee they're happier than other people on average, and it's because they have chickens.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
There's that meme I told you about where guys like my neighbors got chickens, and then they woke me up in the morning and they were doing weird little chicken things and making chicken noises, and I just started laughing, and now I feel good. And my days are better because I wake up. Thank you, chickens. It's like, bro, you can't be depressed while you're looking at chickens.
Yeah.
You're lying to yourself when you do. You're
Only
like,
that they're in cages. I get sad.
but you can let them out and they can walk around.
Yeah.
You just got to make sure you keep the bad ones away, the tigers and stuff. But like, if you're sad, down, or feeling depressed or whatever, and you look at chickens, like, you're gonna laugh. They're
Chase
such
after them, but they don't run that
I think we should turn that into a song on the after show.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Chickens will make you laugh.
Pump that one
Make
out.
you laugh.
I wrote a Chicken City song.
We should
I got
pump it out. That was a good one.
Yeah. And then we'll make a music video of Danny singing it.
Yes.
Yo!
Let's do it.
Xandrux says, give the Dems some credit. They need the need for abortions is likely to increase with the number of unverified individuals allowed into the country. Yikes. Jeez. A little dark, huh?
Keep it real.
All right. What we got here? People wanting me to do Timcast Hour from the delivery room. That's not going to happen.
That's real dedication.
All right. Heisenberg says, hi, Danny. Please check your DM. I'm concerned for Ryan's health. Okay. All right. All right. Trucker Wall says, Phil, what should the military, truckers, traveling nurses, doctors, emergency response personnel, pilots, train conductors, etc. do without absentee ballots? Millions would be disenfranchised.
That's why I said that it should be a holiday.
Holidays are good. I think Election Day should be a holiday. And that being said, smash the like button, share the show with everyone you know, become a member by going to timcast.com and clicking join us, because we're going to go to the members only show where we're going to make naughty AI songs. Naughty ones. So, don't bring your kids. It's not so family friendly, but it'll be fun and funny. And as a member, you get access to the Discord server. We will see you all over at timcast.com, but if you're listening on the audio podcast, give us a good review. It really will help. Otherwise, we'll just see you at timcast.com in about 1 minute.
Cuomo, you know Senator J.D. Vance. Thank you all for being here. A round of applause for the Senator. Thank you for taking the opportunity. Appreciate it. We are, of course, in Michigan. All right, this is a hotbed state. I haven't seen polls this close in this state in a long time. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have independents, and we have an added feature. X working with us. They've been posting all week that this is going to go on. You'll get some of their questions as well. And people online get 2 bites of the apple because we are taping this earlier in the day to accommodate the campaign's schedule. So we will air it, and then we will let you watch it live at that time and take more questions afterwards. So, Senator, let me start with just a little news of the day, specifically. Housing prices are once again pricing millions of Americans out of the market. The new data shows that the problem is only getting worse. We have dealt with both campaigns giving pieces of ideas. Criticism of your campaign is its concepts of ideas. What specifically can you tell the people at home and in this room you could do as vice president with President Trump to make housing prices decrease?
Yeah. So first thing is I want to thank all of you for being here. Chris, thanks to you and your team for hosting. I think it's an important conversation, and hopefully I can persuade some of you to vote for President Trump. But at the very least, I just appreciate you caring enough about the country to pay attention and to listen to the answers that I'm giving here for the next hour. But let me think, when we talk about housing, it's useful to talk about 2 separate sides of the housing problem. There's a supply issue and there's a demand issue, okay? So the supply issue is we don't build enough houses for the people that we have in the United States of America. And there are complicated reasons why we don't do that, right? One is that energy prices are too high. So if we drill, baby drill, open up America's energy markets, lower the cost of energy, then we make it easier to build houses. There's also a lot of stuff that we do on the regulatory side, both at the state and the federal level, to make it harder to build homes. Organizations like NEPA, which make it harder for the United States to build. And I always remind people that our ancestors went to the moon with pocket calculators and slide rulers, and now our government makes it way too hard to build the homes that we need. Now, that's the supply side of it. I think most people actually agree with that. If you ask most Democrats, they'd probably agree with what I just said. What I'm going to say about the demand problem is a little bit more controversial, but I think it's just as important, which is that when you let 25 million illegal aliens, and I think that's the number that we have in our country right now, when you let those folks in your country at the level that we have, well, you got to put them somewhere, right? They have to live somewhere. And that means that those are homes that aren't going to American citizens. In other words, if you take a neighborhood and you add hundreds, or you take a city and you add tens of thousands, or you take a country and you add 25 million people competing against Americans for scarce homes, that's going to drive the cost of housing through the roof too. And there's no coincidence that when we've seen under Kamala Harris's open border, the highest levels of immigration, illegal immigration in our country, basically in our history, that's coincided with the highest levels of house price increases that we've seen in our country in a very long time. I think in Michigan, the number's about 50%. Rents and housing prices have gone up by 50%. We could do a lot better, but simply, we got to build more houses, and we got to make sure those houses go to American citizens, people who have the legal right to be here.
So you got a little of a correlation versus causation. You have illegal immigration, but many analysts will say that's not what's driving the demand problem. The demand problem is interest rates pricing people out and wages not coming up enough. So give a nod to that. On the wage side, of course, not just immigration, but how do you argue that you will get wages up in America? What mechanism can government do?
Well, one is we got to promote prosperity for everybody, right? If you're creating more jobs in the United States of America, especially the good middle-class manufacturing jobs that build the middle class in our country, but also particularly in the state of Michigan. Unfortunately, what we've seen under present leadership, under Kamala Harris's leadership, is we've had a lot of investment in things like electric vehicles manufactured in China, not nearly enough investment in the types of auto jobs that have actually powered the Michigan economy for the last nearly 100 years, right? So you got to create better jobs. You're absolutely right about that. You mentioned mortgage interest rates, and that's something I should have talked about but didn't in the original answer. Mortgage rates are so high because inflation is so high, right? Mortgage rates track with the broader inflation. So when you talk about Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote on trillions of dollars of new spending, when you talk about going to war against American energy, which makes everything more expensive, when you drive up prices, you do drive up interest rates. And one final point I'll make about this, Chris, is when you talk to young Americans, and obviously I'm the first millennial on a major party ticket, it's actually funny because I used to complain about the fact that I turned 40 after Donald Trump made me his vice presidential nominee, and then people would come up to me and say, I just turned 60 or I just turned 70. Stop complaining about turning 40. So I've stopped doing that. But man, so many people in my generation, they're delaying having families. They're delaying getting married because they can't afford a place to raise a family. This is the biggest threat to the American dream, I think, that we've seen in a generation. Young people who would like to build a life in our country but can't afford to buy a house. We've got to do better.
All right, so let's go to the audience. We have Chris, who has a related issue here about the cost of living and childcare for him and his family. It's good to have you, Chris.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Senator Vance, as a fellow father, I have a toddler, and over the past 3 years, my family has spent over $120,000 on childcare. That's not including diapers. Fortunately, my wife and I have great careers, but this raises a major concern. How can families like ours, or those with fewer resources and more kids, sustain the rising costs of raising children today? Do you have any plans to address these affordability gaps?
Yeah, Chris, I appreciate your question, and I'm going to stand up here because it's a little bit easier to talk to people when you're actually standing. I will tell you, the Secret Service told us that if we left this red box, that would be a problem, so hopefully they won't tackle me if I come down and get a little closer. But no, Chris, first of all, how old's your toddler?
She's 3.
She's 3. Okay, great. Look, I hear this a lot, and I know that childcare costs are a big issue. I think, there are a couple of things that we should be doing. I think, first of all, and I know this as the husband of a very, very proud mother, but also a very successful corporate litigator, I think you probably admit that sometimes these issues are a little bit harder for working moms than working dads, though it's harder for everybody, right? And I think that we have to give young women and young men more options to actually build the kind of childcare that works for them, right? Because when you talk to people, right, some people would like to stay at home maybe for a couple of years. Maybe they'd like to stay at home for a few months and then go back to the workforce. Maybe they'd like to go back to the workforce right away. Right now, the childcare regime that we have in this country basically tries to force a one-size-fits-all model on the entire country. And there's a program called the Community Development Block Grant. Probably most people haven't heard of it, but it's one of the main ways the federal government actually funds childcare, and it only unfortunately goes to one kind of model for people who want childcare. Now, you ask yourself, how do you bring down the cost of childcare? One of the things you got to do is get more people who are willing to be childcare providers. And I think that, again, the federal government has tried to pursue a kind of one-size-fits-all model that hasn't been good for most American families. So, like, say, for example, that you have grandparents that would like to help out with the grandkids, but for some financial reason, it's just not possible. Maybe the grandparents have to work, of course, and in the present era, you have a lot of grandparents who are working because under Kamala Harris's inflation, they just can't afford to make ends meet unless they go and take a job maybe they weren't planning to take. Maybe it's aunts and uncles, right? Or maybe you're part of a church community that would like to provide childcare. The federal government actually makes it really hard for anybody other than the people who are currently providing childcare to get into that job. And if you have too few people who are providing childcare, the cost is going to be so much more expensive. So what President Trump and I would like to do is create more flexibility, make it easier for grandparents, aunts and uncles, church communities, nonprofit centers to participate in providing childcare. And then I think we'll be able to drive down the costs for all American families, whatever model of childcare they ultimately choose. That's what we'd like to do.
Are you open to pushing corporations to do better on family leave, not just for women, but for men as well?
No, I think so. Absolutely. Right. I mean, and look, I'm the father of 3 beautiful children. And one of the good things that I can say about my working life is it provided an opportunity for me to spend time with my kids. I know a lot of dads would like to spend time with their kids, but unfortunately their careers or their jobs or the companies that they work for make it harder. I do think that we ought to be open, especially for big companies where there should be more flexibility, to force them to actually be a little bit better on the childcare stuff. I do think that would relieve some pressure on families. I also think, again, we got to make it easier for these nonprofit and local community organizations to provide childcare. A lot of them would like to help out, but they don't get the same federal benefits as other organizations, and that's a big problem.
All right, got another question from the audience. Robert, on rising costs, but for farmers.
Sure. Hey, Robert.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm a 4th-generation farmer. In fact, we sell our produce right across the street here at the Eastern Market. How will your administration, after seeing what we went through after COVID and the important respect to domestic food production, help the American farmer to survive the increasing inflationary costs of doing business in global competition?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Robert. And one thing you probably know, Robert, because you're a farmer, but a lot of people don't realize, and this is maybe the scariest statistic of the last few years, is that America just last year became a net importer of food. What that means is that we grow less food than our people consume, which makes us reliant on other people for the very food that we feed our children. I think that's very, very dangerous, and part of the reason is because we've made it so hard on our farmers. Now, when I talk to farmers, and Ohio, I represent the state of Ohio, don't hold it against me, Michigan, but I talk to a lot of farmers in the state of Ohio because we've got a lot of them. I know Michigan has a lot of farmers too. One of the things that I hear is that between natural gas prices, because natural gas is a big part of the fertilizer that farmers use, between diesel costs, between gasoline costs, the cost of energy has made it really, really hard for our farmers to actually do what they do and grow the food that we need. So we got to bring down energy costs to make it more affordable for farmers to do what they do. The other thing is that we got to make sure that foreign competitors aren't flooding our markets with cheap agricultural products that destroy the wages and the livelihoods of farmers. But again, it makes us more reliant on countries that ultimately don't like us. This is something we got to be very, very worried about. What we learned, you mentioned this, I think, Chris, during COVID, is that we became so dependent on foreign countries for the supply chains, right? We couldn't get like hospital masks and hospital gowns in the midst of a pandemic because China made a lot of that stuff. Well, if we're worried about manufactured goods, how much worse is it to rely on other countries for the very food that we provide to our families? We've got to go in the other direction and cut down on agricultural dumping. One of the ways you do this, and this is a big difference between President Trump and Kamala Harris, is Kamala Harris has really criticized the idea of using tariffs. President Trump has said, rightfully in my view, obviously I'm a little biased, but that unless you're willing to use tariffs to go after countries that are manipulating our own markets, whether it's food, energy, or manufactured goods, you're going to be giving up on American productive workers. We can't do that. We've got to protect our farms, protect our manufacturers, make more of our own stuff, grow more of our own food, and that's fundamentally the President Trump approach to these things.
You have to qualify the understanding based on what we just saw with those 20-plus Nobel winning economists who said, if you do tariffs the wrong way, you wind up spiking prices here that get passed on to the consumer.
Yeah.
And that was also additive to inflation, and they criticized the Trump administration and its future plan for being at risk of doing exactly that.
Sure. So I know that's a criticism that's been out there. Here's why I don't buy it. So first of all, these are the same experts that said shipping our entire manufacturing industry to China, to East Asia, to Mexico would lead to greater American prosperity. They were wrong. It was a mistake to do that. We followed their advice, and now, frankly, a lot of Americans can't afford a good life, can't earn a middle-class wage because we listened to some of those very same people. But the more immediate reason why I don't buy that argument, Chris, is look, Donald Trump was already president, right? These aren't just plans and proposals. He was already president, and when he was president, he did use tariffs, right? And you had the fastest rising take-home pay in 40 years in this country. You had inflation at 1.5%. So, look, you don't have to agree with everything I say or everything that Donald Trump says, but when you actually look at the policy accomplishments, we had low inflation and rising take-home pay, and I think tariffs were a big part of that.
Jennifer, thank you very much for being here. You have a question, change the topic, border immigration concerns.
Yes. Thank you, Senator. I just want to say I love your socks.
Thank you. This is our, I don't know if the camera can zoom in, but this is our dog for 12 years. We actually lost him 6 months ago. But he was a good boy, so I carry around the memory in my socks. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. My question is, there's a lot of focus on crime by undocumented migrants in big cities. But I live in the country. What do you think can be done for the rural areas that are feeling it as well?
Yeah, well, what part of Michigan do you live in?
I live in Belleville, but outside of the city, so I'm like 15 minutes from the airport.
Oh, got it. Okay, sure. So, one of the things that's been really striking about running for vice president is we campaign everywhere. We go to Detroit, we go to everywhere, but you go into some rural areas and you find out, like from the local sheriff, that a local drug cartel member was arrested the week before you were there, and you think to yourself, how did a drug cartel member get into rural Wisconsin or rural Michigan? Like, it doesn't make sense, but this is fundamentally what the open border has done. And this is one of the reasons why I really don't like to segment rural versus urban versus suburban, right? Like, we're all Americans, and unfortunately, I think we're confronting the same problems. I hate to say this, man, but I think the reason why it's so bad is really because of our failed current leadership. When Kamala Harris became vice president, she was appointed the border czar. They bragged about suspending deportations. They bragged about stopping construction of the border wall. They bragged about expanding what's called catch and release, where if somebody comes into our country, they claim asylum, they're released into our country rather than having to wait in Mexico while that asylum claim is processed. That has encouraged this massive increase in illegal immigration. Now, of course, a lot of those folks are good people. They just want to work. Now, I think they should come through the proper channels, but I've got nothing against them personally. But when you open up the border that way and lead to that level of chaos, you're going to get tens of thousands of, unfortunately, pretty hardened criminals who have come into our country. And I think the number that I saw recently, Chris, is approximately 425,000 violent criminal illegal immigrants are in the United States of America right now. That's double the size of the United States Marine Corps. I mean, I served in the Marine Corps for 4 years. It's hard to even imagine twice the number of U.S. Marines that we have are illegal immigrant criminals in this country, and we just got to get back to deporting people who shouldn't be here, finishing the border wall, just enforcing our immigration laws would make so much of this problem go away. And ma'am, I don't know, of course, anything about your background, but I imagine in your community there are a lot of people who are dealing with fentanyl problems. There are a lot of people who've lost kids or grandkids from this terrible epidemic. But I was raised by a woman who struggled with opioid addiction, and I'm very proud of her. If you're watching, Mom, I love you. But she's been clean and sober for almost 10 years. But I often wonder, okay, what if Mom was dealing with addiction in 2024? Would she have gotten that second chance? Would she have gotten the ability to be clean and sober for 10 years? Because the poison that's coming across the border today is more dangerous than anything that has ever been in this country. We've got to give people those second chances, but we're not going to do it without good border enforcement, and that's what I really want us to get back to. And by the way, again, that's not just a proposal from Donald Trump. When he was president, we had the lowest number of illegal border crossings in a very long time. Through simple, common sense law enforcement, we just have to do it again.
So you have an underweighted criminality among immigrants in general, overweighted in terms of the organized crime activity.
Correct.
So why shouldn't the cell not be that they're poisoning our blood, which we hear from Trump on a regular basis, but that the cartels should be treated like the criminal organizations they are? Some argue terrorist organizations. So it's not all the immigrants. It's targeting, and the cartels need to be targeted. Would your administration be in favor of targeting those cartels differently, even as terrorists?
100%. And actually, President Trump, and he's been attacked in some ways by the media, but I don't understand this because, again, I'm biased, but I think it's one of the most common sense proposals is if we're going to use the U.S. military against criminal organizations in the Middle East, why wouldn't we use it against a criminal organization that's on our southern border that's killing almost 100,000 of our citizens every single year? Absolutely, I think we should do that. Now you're right, Chris. I want to be clear here. I do not think that all or most illegal immigrants are violent criminals. I think they should go through the proper channels. I think that doesn't mean they have the right to be in our country, but we have let in far too many illegal immigrant criminals, too many criminal gangs because of what we've been doing with our border policy for the last 3.5 years. I mean, one of the things that I've been really shocked by, this was happened a couple of years ago, so this data is a couple of years old. I was sitting next to a DEA agent on an airplane, and I asked him, this guy, he fights the Mexican drug cartels, and I asked him to sort of give me an update on what's going on. And this was probably in late 2022. He said the cartels have gone from making $1 billion a year when Donald Trump was president to making $14 billion per year in 2022. And it's probably even higher now than it was then. Well, think about all of the weapons. Think about all of the criminal activity they're funding because they're getting rich, and they're getting rich because of our own leadership. We could do so much better. We got to get away from more of the same border policy under Kamala Harris.
Here's our first question from X. All right, a post from user Elaine. If you became president, whom would you rely on for advice?
Well, you're looking at her right there in the front row. She's the smartest and most level-headed person I know. She also, I've got a bit of a temper. Usha's the person who's always extremely even-keeled. And so certainly I would rely on her advice a lot. But look, let me say two things about this. Number one, Donald Trump is as healthy as an ox. There is no chance that he's not going to be able to complete a full 4-year term. I think he's going to do it. He's going to do it with a ton of energy. I mean, just look at the campaign schedule that Donald Trump has kept compared to his Democratic opponents. He's doing like 3 public events for every event that Kamala Harris has done. I have no doubt that Donald Trump is going to be a good president, but a good president for all 4 years. But of course, you know, things happen. That's one of the reasons why you have a vice president, is for those unforeseen circumstances. And I've got, you know, a lot of friends, a lot of very smart policy people that I rely on if, God forbid, something happened and I had to sit in that chair. I think we'd be good, but certainly the most important person I take advice from is my wife.
All right, Senator, good first block. Let's take a break. When we come back here on News Nation, we have a town hall event based in Michigan, but we're taking questions from posts from X from all over the country. So please stay with us. Welcome back here to the News Nation Town Hall with Senator J.D. Vance. We're here in Michigan, we're in Detroit, and we're talking about issues that represent the entire country. Let's get right back to a real person instead of me. Aisha is with us, and you have a question where you want to talk about the socioeconomic divide. What's your question for the Senator?
Okay, so I'm an independent voter, and my question is, why do you think the electorate is split between urban and rural communities? We all have the same concerns, be it jobs, crime, addiction. Why divide us?
Sure. That's a very good question. And I really appreciate you asking that question, because we normally just talk about some of the same old stuff. And I think that's one of the most important things, is why are we so divided as a country? And I think, frankly, part of it is because of failed leadership. I think it's very easy to sort of segment people into rural versus suburban versus urban and make people seem different, when in reality they're actually very similar. And one of the cool things, I wrote this book called Hillbilly Elegy that came out, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And it's sort of about growing up in a poor family, a family that was affected by job loss and addiction and all that stuff. And one of the really cool things that happened is a lot of black people would come up to me afterwards and say, your family's story is my family's story. In the same way that your family came from Appalachia into Ohio and Michigan, my family came from the Deep South into Ohio and Michigan. And we did it for factory jobs, right? Because we wanted, our ancestors wanted an opportunity at a better life. And I think maybe just talking to each other more is actually the solution to the urban-rural divide. One thing that really bothers me about the current political climate is there's too much censorship. There's too much, whether it's going to use big tech or some other platform, we're going to try to silence people. And I think if we talk to each other more, we'd realize that we actually have a lot more in common. And I also think that, you know, I really do believe that the biggest divides in our country are between people who feel like the American dream is available to them and people who feel like it's getting further and further out of reach. So maybe the way to heal that divide is, you know, lower prices and make the American dream more affordable again and give people good job opportunities. Because if people are doing well and we're all doing well together, then we'll have much less division in our country.
Because the person who, like, any candidate who can unite both urban and rural will, like, do an electoral sleep.
I agree, yeah. So even just as a politician, it's in my self-interest to say this. By the way, I think it's one of the things that you're really seeing that's new about the Republican coalition that we've got in this election. And I understand, like, look, I was raised by blue-collar Democrats. My grandmother probably never voted for a Republican her entire life. I think my grandfather voted for a Republican once. There is this really interesting combination of rural people, urban people, people who were Republicans 20 years ago, people who were Democrats 20 years ago, but we just believe in common sense and we believe in prosperity. And one, thank you, and one other just really interesting thing, again, we talked about the Marine Corps earlier, one of the great things about the U.S. military is you've got white, black, brown, you've got rich people, you've got poor people, you've got people from the East Coast and the West Coast, and we're all part of the same team. It's one of the great things that I took away from my military experience is that we're all Americans. As my drill instructors used to say, you're either dark green or light green, but you're all equally worthless. That's what the drill instructors would say. And I think that out of that, we got this sense that we were all part of the same American family. I think our leadership has to get back to that attitude. Thank you, ma'am.
How do you deal with the fact that your running mate is known for division, who has made a lot of progress in creating a movement that is based on concerns about others?
Well, Chris, I guess I just see it differently, right? And I understand. I mean, look, look, if background, I was very critical of Donald Trump in 2016. And I came around because I probably bought into the idea that he was all about division in 2015 and 2016. And then I listened to what he said and I saw the results and I recognized that actually the media story about Donald Trump is not always the full truth. In fact, it's often the exact opposite of the truth. So when I go to a Donald Trump rally, what I hear is people from all walks of life. I hear people of all skin colors coming together, celebrating the country, and talking about how we're going to redeliver prosperity in the United States of America again. I really do think that Donald Trump wakes up every day, and whether you're living in inner city Detroit or rural Michigan, he thinks, how can I make your life better and more prosperous? And I really do think that's the way to heal the divisions. I tend to think the divisions are the result of people feeling left behind. Make people feel less left behind. And again, when you've got inflation at 1.5% and wages rising faster than they ever have, that's how you bring people into the American fold and make them feel like we're all on the same team. And I think that's Donald Trump's approach to governing.
All right, another question. Who do we have here? Michael?
Yeah.
Michael, you have a question where you want to talk about foreign
What can I
issues,
help you
specifically the war that's going on in
May your
Ukraine. What's your
blaze
question?
never
Yes.
dull.
I'm Michael. I'm a student at the University of Michigan and a undecided voter. And I wanted to ask what the practical steps that your administration plans to take to end the war in Ukraine are.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that question. And look, you're obviously a student at the University of Michigan. I think that your generation should care especially a lot about this, because if we don't get this right, then we know that when the world gets set on fire, and unfortunately it's gotten very tumultuous under Kamala Harris's leadership, it's young men and young women from America who have to go overseas to pick up the pieces. And so one of the biggest and most important arguments I can make for Donald Trump is I really believe that he is the candidate of peace. And so let me say two things about this. The first and most important thing, the best way to stop a war is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And if you notice, when Donald Trump was president, we didn't have any new wars. For the first time in 20 years, you had 4 years where there were no new wars started. And the reason is that Donald Trump followed a very simple principle of peace through strength. To be more direct, people were afraid of him. They were afraid that if they did something crazy, Donald Trump would respond to it. And so the bad actors all across the world, whether in Russia or North Korea, they were more in check when Donald Trump was president. So the first thing that we've got to do is prevent it. But you're asking now, of course, about a war that's already in progress. And how do we stop it? And I think that the seeds of peace in Russia and Ukraine come from recognizing that as unfortunate as it is, and Russia shouldn't have invaded Ukraine in the first place, both the Russians and the Ukrainians are exhausted. They're both struggling to find men. It's primarily men in those countries that are fighting the war, but they're struggling to find women too. They're struggling to get the equipment necessary to send to the front lines. Their economies are exhausted. Whole parts of their country have been destroyed. Both of these parties want this war to end. And I think, unfortunately, you've got a lot of American leaders who like to beat their chest and say, well, this is the good guy and that's